How much should I practice each day, and how many days a week should I practice? I'm Philip Galinsky, founder and director of Samba New York, and as a samba percussion coach, this is a question I sometimes get asked. And you may have the very same questions yourself as a learner of samba percussion or whatever instrument or style you play. And I never tell my students how much I think they should practice each day, how many days a week I think they should practice. This is very much an individual thing, an individual choice. Obviously, it's subjective. Only you know how much time you have available to devote to your practice. But what's even more important, in my opinion, what's most critical for me is that we want to be motivated to practice, internally motivated to practice, and inspired to practice. So for me, practicing and music in general is fun. And I come at it from a place of pure love for the music, love for the instruments, joy in playing, joy in learning. This for me is the most important thing. And if you keep that, foremost in your mind and in your behavior in terms of how you relate to music and to your instruments, then practicing is not an issue anymore. It's just something that you're inspired to do just because you love it. So that's actually, for me, the most enjoyable and the healthiest way to be involved with music, and for me anyway. And I also think at the same time, it's a much more effective way to learn, because if we love something, we're just naturally going to want to do it more and more and more. Having said all that, when somebody asks me, well, what do you suggest? How much time would you suggest that I devote to my practice? And I usually come back to the 5-minute rule, which I learned from Kenny Werner, the great piano player and author of the classic book, Effortless Mastery, which I highly recommend that every musician read. It's an excellent book, really inspiring. And basically the 5-minute rule is the idea that what tends to be the most challenging in terms of setting up a practice routine is simply starting the practice session, right? So many of us have busy lives. We have a lot of other responsibilities. How do we find the time to practice? So if we tell ourselves that we're only expecting ourselves to practice 5 minutes a day, that is a much more manageable number. And probably most people can find 5 minutes a day to practice. Maybe you can't find 30, maybe you can't find an hour, but you can probably find 5 minutes. And what's pretty incredible about it is that you can actually get a lot done in 5 minutes if you know what to practice. And in my experience, what's even more important than the amount of time that you practice each day, it's the consistency of the practice. So if you're doing it multiple times a week, that's so much more important than how much time you practice each day. So we'll get into that in a minute, but the idea is that it's really hard often to start your practice session if you're really busy. And so what helps is this 5-minute rule, because once you start, you'll probably find that you're so into it that you'll just continue, hopefully. But even if you don't, that's okay. And let's say one day you practice 5 minutes, the next day you practice 30 minutes. That second day, or that third day, I should say, you don't raise your expectation to 30 minutes. You revert back to 5 minutes. That's why I call it the 5-minute rule, or Kenny Werner calls it the 5-minute rule. I'm paraphrasing it, but it's something like that. So this is something that I find to be really helpful for my students because, as I said, most people can find 5 minutes a day. How many days a week would I suggest? Well, I would suggest practicing at least 5 days a week, maybe 6. So just find the days of the week that work the best for you. I would suggest scheduling it, or saying, for example, I'm going to do my 5 minutes every day before work, or every day after work, or during my lunch period, or whatever the case may be. Okay, so that's what I suggest, and let me give you some examples of how this can work in an actual practice session. So let's say that you're working on your caixa, your Brazilian snare drum. Let's say that you're somewhat new to stick technique. I have a playlist on the channel here called Stick Technique, so you can dive into that and that will help you. But let's say that you're working on what I consider to be the most basic pattern for samba on the caixa, which is just this: 3E and a 4E and a. Okay, so just 16th notes or 4 subdivisions per main beat of the samba. There are 4 main beats in the measure, and there are 4 16th notes per beat. Of course, there's a certain spacing to the notes and accent pattern and so forth. But let's say we have 5 minutes to practice. The first thing that I would work on in those 5 minutes would be making sure that we understand all the strokes that we're using in this pattern. So essentially we have down strokes where we're throwing the stick down and we're catching it in the palm of our hand upon impact. That's a down stroke. In the right hand and the left hand, doesn't matter if you play matched grip or traditional grip, whatever the case may be. Let's just do matched for now. So down in the right, down in the left. Okay, we got that. Now we got to work on our tap strokes, which are just a little tap and letting the stick bounce once. So let's practice a down and then a tap in our right hand and a down and a tap in our left. So maybe do that for, let's say, 2 minutes. Okay? Set your timer. Okay, so you look at your timer, 2 minutes have gone by. Okay, I've gotten that pretty well. Let's move on to the basic pattern. So let's say you're, as I said, a beginner at this. Let's set our metronome to 30 beats per minute set to the 8th note. Let's just play this basic pattern along with the metronome for our remaining 3 minutes. 1, 2, 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and. So the downbeats and the or the last subdivision are going to be accented. The first and the fourth. The first more than the fourth. Okay, so let's say you do that for 3 minutes, and then your 5 minutes is up. Okay, doesn't mean you have to stop after those 5 minutes. Let's say, and in fact, I would highly encourage you to just do other things that you find really fun. But the actual, kind of deep practice where you're working on something that you can't do yet, or that you can't do as well as you'd like, or as fast as you'd like, or whatever the case may be, that's what I call, or what's called, or can be called, deep practice. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the 5 minutes. But if you have more time, maybe put on some recordings and play along with the recordings, play with other musicians. Have fun with it, watch videos, get inspired, okay? So that's an example on the caixa. Let's say that you're working on the tamborin, all right? And you're working on the so-called cajitero. Let's say you're working on the 3-in-1 technique, which involves a down, another down, and a turn at the same time, and up and a down. Those are the 4 16th notes. So and the same accent pattern. So we have down, down, up, down, 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 up, down, down. Let's say we have 5 minutes to devote to our practice of the 3-in-1 cajitero. All right, so let's just work without the metronome on getting the down. That's the first stroke. The second stroke is a down with a turn. The third stroke is an up and a turn back. And then the fourth stroke is another down. So we kind of can work on that, work on the mechanics of that, making sure our form is really good for, let's say, 2 minutes. And then we put on our metronome and we do the same thing. Let's play our pattern for 3 minutes. 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. Okay, so what do we do when we get really good at 30 beats per minute? Well, for that second portion of our 5-minute practice session, we can move the metronome up by 5 beats per minute every week, or whatever works for you. but I suggest to my students moving the metronome up by 5 beats per minute every week, so that you're constantly challenging yourself at faster and faster tempos, but gradually, not just speeding up. You're not going from 30 to 100, but just going 30 one week, 35 the next week, 40 the week after, and so forth and so on. Okay? So this is just a suggestion. These are just some ideas, ways to organize your practice sessions using the 5-minute rule, thanks to Kenny Werner and his excellent book, Effortless Mastery. And hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like to consider me as your samba percussion coach, you can reach me at info@sambanewyork.com. I offer a free trial session. If you'd like to explore whether having me as your coach would work for you, we can do that completely free of charge, and then we can take it from there. All right, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.